What is up, Slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and this week, I'd planned on doing an episode about this particular band, really from the very beginning of the podcast. It was just a matter of time, and sometimes it's fortuitous of, recent events. When I say fortuitous, the actual reason that they're in the news, this particular band, is because of something unfortunately tragic, however, always trying to find a way to make something positive and a celebration of life. So the band that I really wanted to do was the Foo Fighters. And this weekend, they had the Taylor Hawkins Tribute Concert in London. And I believe they're also going to have one in the States, or maybe it already happened and I missed it. However, it was a very powerful event, and there's a lot of emotion that went into it. I'm very rarely broken up necessarily about a celebrity death. Now, certainly there are times that celebrity deaths have hit me hard. Carrie Fisher, for example, Princess Leia, when she passed away, it was very upsetting just because I associated so much of my life with her. She's Princess Leia. Taylor Hawkins has been the drummer in one of my all-time favorite bands. And I don't always listen to them or listen to their newer releases, but certainly for a period of time, they were right up there and continue to be up there in my all-time favorite bands. They were certainly around probably 2 or 3, and they've gone up and down in my top 10 at various different points. However, let's go kind of a little bit of a journey with Foo Fighters that starts all the way back with, of course, Nirvana. Now, I've talked about it on the show before, but I wasn't necessarily this huge Nirvana fan. When Nevermind came out, I was a hair metal guy, but I was also interested in thrash and punk. But there was something about Nevermind, apart from maybe Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's a pretty infectious tune, but it wasn't on the whole an album I gravitated towards. So when I would go out with my friends and we're driving around town, they would put on the record. And I was always like, is this good? I'm not sure that it is good. I hated songs like Polly, for example. And then, of course, there's the retroactive historians. Oh, man, Bleach, that's like an awesome album, man. Bleach is even better than Nevermind, and all that kind of stuff. We all go through it where we start exploring a particular band and going on to their early discography because we're interested in them and how they developed and how they evolved as artists. But to say that Bleach is better than Nevermind, that's some revisionist history right there. But again, I wasn't really into the band. I enjoyed their interviews. I kind of liked that they had this little mini feud with Guns N' Roses. That just seemed perfect and apropos for the time. One of your major Sunset Strip bands, debauchery, misogyny, all the things that came with it, and this band that had a much more rooted punk rock influence and trying to combat those things. Even pushing back, I guess, on this uber masculine mentality of, rock and roll. Kurt Cobain, the sensitive artist. However, when they came out with their follow-up record to Nevermind, the album In Utero, now this album I liked from the very beginning. The first single that was dropped off of that was Heart-Shaped Box. Loved it. So I actually went and bought the record. This was the time that Dave Grohl was finally having an opportunity to be part of the songwriting process, where Kurt Cobain, loosened the reins a little bit, for Chris Novoselic and for Dave to be more part of the songwriting process. So a song like Scentless Apprentice, easy for me to say, Scentless Apprentice, which starts out with this really rock and roll beat. It's just, I don't know, it probably could have been on a hairband album, right? And it's just a very different approach to song than perhaps Nirvana had ever had before. And Dave Grohl said himself that Kurt's like, I don't really know that this is going to fit or it's going to work. And it did. And it was that little bit of shift in their sensibilities and going beyond just Kurt's vision and really starting to expand his horizons and allowing someone who will come to know is an amazing songwriter in Dave Grohl. It was just that record spoke to me in a way that the other ones hadn't. So, fast forward. We of course know the untimely and tragic death of Kurt Cobain. Now, it's not tragic in a way of, you hear someone who all of a sudden has a heart attack or a car crash or something like that. It's a different type of tragedy, one that sadly was self-inflicted. It was a dark time in music, and for at least a couple of years, it kind of had a little bit of a pall over the whole scene and punk rock and independent music, because they'd achieved something that so few people had, and unfortunately cost Kurt Cobain his life. Fame certainly contributed to his troubles. So that's what makes this past weekend's concert all the more tragic, is that Dave Grohl is a human being, just as we all are. And he lost the lead singer, the creator, the man who helped make him famous, the band that made him famous in Nirvana, basically took his own life. And through the scourge, the disease that is substance abuse, now Dave has lost another band member, someone close to him. It's just awful, and I can't imagine what he's going through just as a human being. I moved to Boston somewhere in, I want to say, early 95, I believe, because I'm fairly certain that I turned 21 in Boston. So I'd grown up in Meriden, decided I needed to get away. It wasn't the right place for me at that time. And I've never gone back. And I began to work at a place called Urban Outfitters. Now, Urban Outfitters at the time was certainly a corporation. I don't want to pretend like it wasn't. However, each one of the stores kind of had their own vibe based upon where they were located, but also who was working there at the time. So the Cambridge Urban Outfitters didn't look or sound like the Boston Urban Outfitters on Newbury Street, where I worked. So all the young people that work there, we are all pierced and tattoos and mohawks and blue hair, purple hair, just all different types. You had your goths, your skaters, your punks. You even had some preppies here and there. It's retail in Boston. But what was fun was we were allowed to set the soundtrack, which means we could all just bring in our favorite records. Something new comes out that we're interested in, we get to go throw that in the multi-CD player, and you hit it on shuffle, and the next thing you know, you'll hear the latest Faith No More record, for example. Somehow we got Mr. Bungle in there too. But I remember clearly this moment that Urban Outfitters began to be a much more corporate entity, looking for uniformity at the different locations. That began with the music and mandated music. Now, it's a smart business strategy, which is we're going to play particular albums that have been cultivated or partnership deals with the record labels. Because if you want to grow a band along a particular demographic, let's say people in their teens and 20s in Boston, what are you going to do? You want to have your music in places like Urban Outfitters. So one of the very first corporate records, if you will, was this very strange album with this tan cover and what looked to be some kind of Martian laser blaster with the name Foo Fighters. So when Dave Grohl first formed the band, he used the name Foo Fighters to remain anonymous because he figured, hey, Dave Grohl, well, Dave Grohl has an instant name cachet, but imagine you've just gone from being in one of the biggest bands in the world, losing one of your best friends, lead singer, songwriter, and guitar player. There has to be a tremendous amount of insecurity about that. What if it's not good? What if I put it out under my name and people say it sucks? Or maybe it provides ample opportunity, but maybe too much opportunity when he's looking to be a new artist. Doing something on his own is important. I think that goes back to the whole Seattle ethos and even the DC punk scene where Dave Grohl first started. Do it yourself. So maybe he didn't want any additional advantages that went with the name, but also the music couldn't have been more different than Nirvana. And I'm sure that was a piece of it too. So this record comes in, we throw it on, and you would have had to have been reading, trade publications or stuff like that to know that it was Dave Grohl. Looking at the back of the record, like, who is this? And it was very interesting because, I don't know, based upon what we know about the band later, that first record was lighter in a lot of ways. Probably what he was dealing with emotionally and stuff that he had been tracking for years that he knew wasn't going to be appropriate for Nirvana. And now he had a place to express himself. There's what do they call it? The Mentos commercial. It was you I fell into, right? Or a song like Call to Arms. This was very, very different. So Dave did all of it himself. He wrote the whole album, performed the whole album. Guitars, drums, all of it, start to finish, was his creation. So he needs to form a band. So his band at that time comprised of two guys from a band called Sunny Day Real Estate. Now this also was a little bit of a street cred scenario for the people who are into independent, sub-pop records, early days of emo. I mean, Sunny Day Real Estate was considered the first emo band. Well, he gets the rhythm section from Sunny Day Real Estate, William Goldsmith and Nate Mendel. He needed another guitar player, an accomplished guitar player. So he went and found himself the former second guitar player for Nirvana, Pat Smear, formerly of The Germs. Also makes a cameo in Raspberry Beret, the Raspberry Beret video by Prince. So now you have the band. Dave, guitar, vocals, Pat Smear on guitar, Nate Mendel on bass, William Goldsmith on drums, and they hit the road in support of Foo Fighters, although none of them performed on the record. By all accounts, they did it the hard way. They did small venues, opening for other established bands. Now, if Dave Grohl would have came out and just said, I'm Dave Grohl, he probably could have gone right into larger to mid-sized venues just on name value alone. But instead, he's opening for, Mike Watt and other bands. Just doing it the hard way. Let's get out, get into these small venues, be close to the crowd, and really make this band a band. And you can only do that through touring and performing. So now the time came for them to get into the studio. And I think this is the record, well, I know it's the record, that really catapulted them into huge fame. And I am no different than anyone else. When I first heard The Color and the Shape, I was blown away. But let's talk about the recording of that record really quickly. Because it's well known that when they got into the studio, now imagine being the drummer for Dave Grohl. Think about that. Widely considered one of the best rock drummers ever. In fact, after Kurt Cobain had died, Dave Grohl got the call to join Tom Petty's band. Tom Petty, I want you to be the drummer for my band. And Dave said it was one of the hardest decisions of his life because he would have loved to have gone on tour and been a member of Tom Petty's band. But he's like, no, I got to do this Foo Fighters thing. I got to see this out. I got to see what's in me as an artist. And he declined. So he's a really, really good drummer. Imagine being that guy, to be in the studio with Dave Grohl over your shoulder while you're recording your drum parts. That must be unnerving. And by all accounts, Dave Grohl is a perfectionist in the studio. 96 takes of one song. 96 takes. 13 hours of recording drums for one song. So as you can imagine, William Goldsmith was very intimidated by this and offended by this, as you can only imagine. Which kind of got exacerbated when, without telling him, Dave re-recorded all of the drums himself. Heartbreaking, and William Goldsmith left the band. Dave insists that he was not fired from the band. He still wanted him to be the touring drummer. He just didn't like what he had done in the studio. But I remember putting on The Color and the Shape, and my roommates at the time, one of them in particular, was a huge Sunny Day Real Estate fan. And the first time we did a whole listen through the record, it was My Hero and that opening drum beat that seemed so reminiscent of that whole scene, that whole emo scene, that whole vibe. So whether Dave re-recorded it or not, I think some of the rhythmic aspects of that Color and Shape record are firmly rooted in Nate and William Goldsmith as a already established rhythm section. And I think that was a huge influence and what took the band to that next step. So going from that Foo Fighters, all Dave, all the time, start to finish, to the band environment with other contributors, I think that made all the difference in the world and really catapulted them forward, taking all these elements that the individual members were bringing to it. You know, Pat Smear is a pure punk rock guitarist, right? But he'd spent time touring with Nirvana. I mean, perfect. And then think about a riff like Monkey Wrench. I mean, you wouldn't have expected that coming from the band that had released that first record. I mean, just leaps and bounds forward. But I really fell in love with the band at that point. And songs like Everlong, I mean, come on. They're perfect. Everlong is evergreen. That was actually a song that I sang to all of my children in utero. And I think they all still love that song to this day because of it. But now, they need a new drummer. Now, Dave can't do both. What are they going to get? So there's this kid who's been playing with Alanis Morissette and her touring band. This guy who is just pure energy, kind of like Dave. Just a maniac behind the kit. And his name, of course, is Taylor Hawkins. So Taylor is brought into the band and says the same thing that William Goldsmith said. It is really intimidating and challenging to be the drummer for one of the greatest drummers ever. But he jumped right in. And around this time, Pat Smear decided that he was not going to continue with the band. They recorded the record, and he decided he wasn't going to go on tour. So they brought in Franz Dahl to be the guitar player. So now here was your formed band at this point. Franz, Nate, Taylor, Dave. This is the band. And they went on to become massive superstars. Really good stuff. I mean, how do you debate it? That Color and the Shape record, it's still one of the best. And I think that it's still their second best selling record ever. So I kind of became a every other album fan. Does that make sense? Because I feel as though bands go through ebbs and flows. Very few bands are consistently great record after record after record. Now, I'm not saying that the records that I didn't gravitate towards weren't tremendous, just for whatever reason, didn't speak to me. So that next record came out in 1999, and that's There Is Nothing Left to Lose, which is the first one with this whole, new band, if you will. And here are, the first single that was released from that was Learn to Fly. I loved Learn to Fly. Great song. But I never really got into the record. And maybe it's something that I need to go back and listen to, because I say they're one of my favorite bands, yet I'm not a fan of their whole discography necessarily. So I don't have a ton to say about that second record. And even One by One, think about some of the singles there. All My Life, Times Like These is one of their great songs and continues to be a huge part of their set list. But again, I never got into that whole record. But let's go one record forward. And this is their huge double album release, In Your Honor. I was hooked from the very beginning. So basically what they did is, I remember Dave saying that this was going to be his Led Zeppelin records, like this, his Led Zeppelin double album. And one side, or one album, is heavy rock. It's all their rock and roll stuff. They got some bluesy stuff. They got some rockers. They got some punky stuff on there. And then the other record is kind of acoustic and slower, middle of the road kind of stuff to satisfy both this yin and yang. Where when you think about it, like Nirvana and even Nirvana, the Pixies, Smashing Pumpkins, and some of that stuff on The Color and the Shape, there's this quiet, loud dynamic, right? But what if you just went ahead and had all loud and all quiet, right? And just having the song separate instead of just going ahead and kind of interspersing in verse, chorus, verse. But the songs that were released on that, also, one of them in particular is a staple of their set, and that's Best of You. Such a wonderful, guttural vocal performance by Dave. But that's not my favorite song from those records. My favorite song, The Deepest Blues Are Black. I don't know why, but I have always, I would put that song on over and over and over again. Just something about it. The guitar, the melody line, just so interesting to me. Love that song. And Miracle from your slow side. For some reason, I had a newborn at this time, so my oldest had been born in 2005, and that song Miracle was just, it really made me feel like here I have this miracle. It was just the right song at the right time. And the very first Mother's Day, I made like this video compilation of all these still photos and little video clips of my son. And I used that song as the background. So the Foo Fighters have been also this kind of interesting bridge between me and my kids, going all the way back, like I said, to in the womb and singing Everlong to my babies, and then having a song like Miracle really think of the joys of birth. But that double album, that was killer. And I actually, if I'm remembering correctly, that was the first album. So talk about a shift in the music industry. That was the first album I bought on Apple Music, or iTunes, as it was called at the time. I didn't buy physical copies. I just downloaded it and then burned CDs. Anyone who was of a certain age was like, you did what now? Yeah. Streamed it, then went ahead and burned it. That's what I could listen to in the car or on my CD Walkman or whatever, because I didn't have like an iPod or an MP3 player. But that was the first album that I fully streamed, no physical copy. I didn't listen to the 5 songs and a cover little EP. So, when did I? Yeah, I skipped a whole bunch of records, honestly. Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace. The Pretender's on there. That's a good record. That's a good song. But I didn't buy it or stream it. I don't think. Yeah, so the next time I picked up a record, went ahead, downloaded it, owned it, was Wasting Light. Wasting Light, Rope, White Limo, Walk. I mean, just these days, great record. So again, I'm like kind of off and on with when I am listening to their music. And I'll have to go back and listen to the albums in between and see if my gut instinct for when they came out, why I didn't react to them. Now, some of it could simply just be life. So between 2005 and 2008, I went from having no kids to 3 kids. And at one point, we had 3 kids, 3 and under. Life just gets busy. And maybe I just wasn't listening to music. And I know for a lot of that time, when I'd go out and mow my lawn, for example, I was listening to a ton of Boston sports talk radio. Now, if you know anything about Boston sports, if you want to be put in a perpetually bad mood, listen to Boston sports talk radio. Because even when the teams are absolutely killing it, these folks on the radio will just make you feel like they're the worst thing that you've ever seen. Patriots, they won a bunch of Super Bowls. Let's tell you what they did wrong in the Super Bowl and what could have been better. Red Sox win a World Series. Yeah, but that one pitcher, that one closer sucks. I mean, it will eat away your soul. Honestly, I had to stop listening to it. Now, for the most part, I listen to podcasts, and the podcasts are meant to be fun and just, content that I'm interested in. But I digress. I probably wasn't listening to a ton of music because I was listening to that stuff. Or if I'm mowing the lawn on a Sunday, I'm listening to the game on my headphones and not listening to music. Now I'm more apt to mow the lawn, listening to music, or listening to a podcast, and my life is better for it. So if you are listening to Boston Sports Talk Radio, I suggest you stop because it's not healthy. Anyway, so the Foo Fighters have been, without a doubt, a significant part of my life since the 90s. They put out a couple of EPs, and then they put out Sonic Highways. And I remember when it came out, and it just didn't speak to me at all. And that came out in, 2014. And I think that was right around the time that Dave Grohl, that's when he had that TV series. So this is when they were doing stuff with like Rick Astley and Rick Springfield and kind of doing an exploration, because I think they were recording at a studio that some of the biggest records in the history of the music industry had been recorded at. And Dave is, if nothing else, a huge music fan. Dave has always been, I guess, a cheerleader for music. You tend to have these guys who, I only listen to X, Y, and Z. And I've seen it in local independent music scenes where, I'm only into hardcore bands, or I'm only into metal bands, or I'm only into this genre or that genre. Whereas Dave, and I think that's what has informed their music, of having all these different genre influences. But he was one of the first guys to kind of come out and say, hey, yeah, I was part of this, DC punk scene and this Seattle grunge scene. But I also love Motorhead and the Doobie Brothers, or Rick Springfield, or, I don't know, Rick Astley. Because good songwriting, regardless of genre, I think has such a huge impact on people. You have to recognize great craftsmanship. ABBA, that's some really intricate and complicated musicianship. Good stuff. Not what I would immediately gravitate towards and go, you know what I really want to listen to? Now, mind you, there's a couple of ABBA songs that I would want to listen to and have been on different playlists. But Dave was really one of those first people championing these different types of music that were pushing people outside of this very narrow view of what they believe to be good music. And I think that if you don't have that, you really miss out on a lot. And if you're interested in creating music, I don't think you can just listen to a very narrow group. I don't think that you can become, well, I mean, I guess you can. I'm sure there are people who at one point only listened to, let's say, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, right? And that's all they listened to for however many years. And I'm sure those guys became metal gods somewhere on some band. But I think that Dave really wore all these and continues to wear all these different influences right out on his sleeve. And speaking of Taylor Hawkins, Taylor made it very, very clear that he was a huge fan. His favorite band was Queen. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics that go on there. And, Roger Taylor, is it Roger Taylor? I think it's Roger Taylor. Because then when I say Taylor, I start thinking of the Taylor brothers, or I guess not even brothers, for Duran Duran. There's John Taylor and the other Taylor. Roger Taylor, yeah, I'm right. I don't know why I was second guessing myself. But Roger Taylor is how do I put this? He's a great solid drummer. Like Charlie Watt is a great solid drummer. And also very traditional in a lot of ways. Where Taylor is all kinetic energy and just flying all over the place. Yet he wouldn't have come to that had it not been listening to these really fundamentally good artists, these really solid drummers. You could learn more about being a drummer from Charlie Watt than you can from John Bonham. Honestly, just from being able to lay it down in the pocket, solid, like you are a metronome. That's an impressive quality. Now you take someone like Taylor Hawkins, who was able to do that killer timekeeping while doing a whole bunch of bonker stuff behind the kit, while being the drummer for one of the greatest drummers of all time. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Franz left the band. I guess there were musical differences, yet said he, by all accounts, loved his time in Foo Fighters. They just had a different idea about what the next record would bring. So they brought in Chris Shiflett from No Use for a Name, Fat Records, Fat Mike's record label, punk rock as hell. Brought him in, and he became the guitar player since, like 99 or something like that? But basically, he's been the guitar player for the band for the majority of their tenure. And then somewhere along the line, Pat Smear decided, hey, let's get back in there. So now you have a band that's rocking 3 guitar players and a killer rhythm section in Nate Mendel and Taylor Hawkins. They also decided to round out the band's sound by having their touring keyboard player become a permanent member of the band, and Rami Jaffe, who before that was probably most well known for being the original keyboard player for the Wallflowers. You may remember them from One Headlight, Bob Dylan's kid, Jacob Dylan. So the Foo Fighters, amazingly, when you really think about it, they have been around since 1994. 1994. And when you consider that this is Dave's band and what he had come from, because Nirvana, in the grand scheme of things, despite their, influence, certainly influence on music as a whole, they only lasted from 1987 to 1994. Think about that. That's such a remarkably short period of time. Now, one of the things that, Kurt Cobain said in his suicide letter was, quoting the Neil Young line, it's better to better to burn out than fade away, right? Better to burn out than fade away. Yet the Foo Fighters, and I don't know what their plans are with Taylor's passing, I imagine they're going to continue on. I don't know. In watching the tribute concert, there's a part of me that thinks maybe Travis Barker becomes the drummer for the band, because I think you have to have a certain amount of dynamism, as I've said multiple times throughout the podcast, to be Dave Grohl's drummer. Travis Barker certainly has been accused of over-drumming more than under-drumming. Just because you can do a fill in a particular spot in a song doesn't mean you should, but that certainly lended itself to Blink-182 sound. But here you have a band that, before you know it, it's going to be 30 years. And I think their influence and their reach on music extends to what they've done for other bands and the relationships they've cultivated with these other bands. And for those of you who don't know, that tribute concert that happened this weekend, that was done at Wembley Stadium. And with the exception of the bowl, behind the stage, that place was packed. Packed. Very, very impressive. Very, very impressive. The reach and scope of the band. Where they go from here, I don't know. But I'm hoping that they continue. I'm hoping that they keep the spirit and the memory of Taylor Hawkins alive. I certainly hope that for Taylor's family, these tribute concerts give some catharsis and give a glimpse into just how loved he was as an artist, as a musician, that you can fill a stadium just with people who want to show their love and admiration for a person that they've never met. I think when you really love a band, you feel like you get to know them because you read all the interviews, you watch all the interviews, and you see the behind the stage stuff, the backstage stuff, the behind the scenes, clips. They'll do these little, whenever they do a tour, there'll be some behind the music kind of thing. And they're always so interesting because ultimately, despite their massive fame, despite their obvious financial position in the world, let's just say they're all rich, they're still human beings, living, breathing human beings with trials and tribulations that all of us face. With Taylor, it was alcohol and drugs that was exacerbated by anxiety, or at least that's everything that we've read. I can't say that I know for certain. We get into this whole hero worship thing and sometimes forget that humanity lies under all of this. And here's Dave Grohl, who probably knows better than anyone, because of the losses that he's felt, both with Nirvana and with the passing of Taylor Hawkins. So I knew I wanted to do this Foo Fighters kind of retrospective, as I like to do. So what are my favorite songs? Just like to throw that out there. Oh, and I also have to say, just very quickly, I've never seen them live. Again, it's never the right time or the right place, like I said, with Anthrax. So there's a couple of my all-time favorite bands that I've never seen live. And I'm really sad that if I do ever get to see the Foo Fighters, it won't be with Taylor Hawkins behind the kit. That's just something that, I'll have to live with. I never got to see them. I wanted to see them when they had that tour with Weezer. I think they called it the Foozer Tour. I mean, that would have just been such a great show. But again, when that was happening, little kids, just no real time to do it. Yeah, kind of a bummer. But my favorite songs. Now, I've already mentioned Everlong, and I think that anyone who's a Foo Fighters fan that's just got to be up there because it's just a perfect song. I mean, it hits everything that you could possibly want. Truly. I mentioned the Deepest Blues Are Black. Such a good song. Best of You is one that you really want to belt. Really just want to open up and sing that. My Hero. Such a good song. Miracle. Miracle's really good. And, Times Like These, off a record I didn't buy. What's your favorite? So let me know. So here on YouTube, put it down in the comments. Or if you're listening to the podcast, hop on over to the social media platforms. Let me know. What are your favorite Foo Fighters songs? Or maybe what's your favorite Foo Fighters memory? Tell me about a show that you've seen. Or maybe you're just your favorite Taylor Hawkins moment. Let me know. So how are you going to do that? You can find me on Facebook at Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, and here on YouTube at StuckPodX. You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. Please leave 5-star reviews, leave me glowing comments, and most importantly, no matter which platform you're on, please subscribe to the podcast. So, until next time, later, slackers.